Good evening, everyone. This is Vera Sadler with VLS Coaching, your host of Tuesday Talk Live, and we are here for an amazing conversation tonight with Pastor Keisha. I'll call her Pastor Keisha Jones, Professor Keisha Jones. She has many titles, but tonight we have a segment that's going to go. It's going to go wild, I believe, and it's going to go virtual. It's going to go all over because it's leading up into our Black History Month. And give us a moment because you know me, guys, that I have to get all my technology going, all my technology in the right place. Conversations go. So if you guys give us just a moment, we're getting everything set up. But I am so excited tonight to have this conversation. And I'll just call her Professor Jones, or I may just call her Keisha because she is my sister. She is my friend. And I'm so excited, Professor Keisha, Professor Jones, to have you on tonight again.
I am excited.
And we had talked, I think, in December about when grief hurts, or when the holidays hurt, and we talked about coming back on live to have this conversation. I want to preface this by saying, even though we're leading up in this conversation about our history, and we're going into Black History Month, but for me, Black History is all month long, all year long, and I know for you, it is all year long, and you're really not just, I won't say radical about it, because I don't want to use that term. I want to say you're serious about it.
That's a good way to
I'd rather say that you're serious about it, not just radical, because I think some people that I want to say are radical, they can pop in and out. It's just when the mood hits them or when a cause hits them. But I'd rather say, as your sister, I know that you're serious about educating individuals about their history, culture, and things that should be important to us. And so that's what we're going to do this segment. So I'm hoping people would just hop on in. I see some people are coming in. Hey guys, come in. Let us know you're here. Welcome to Tuesday Talk Live. And we're going to jump right into a conversation because Professor Jones has a lot of information. I'm addressing her that way tonight, and not just Pastor Jones, which she stands in that right very well as well. But I want you to understand where she's coming from. She is a professor of African American studies, psychology, and sociology. So she has the ability to teach in this subject. She has the knowledge and all the background that comes with it. So Professor Jones, you can either introduce the people, hop right in, and you know me, I may give you a flag because both of us can talk. But when I need to maybe ask a question or get some more clarity on something you say. So I may have to, so wait a minute, give me some more information, but I want you to be able to share the information in data. I think it's so important that you're sharing data, not just something you feel, but things you've researched.
Yes. So in addition to, and I'm honored to be your guest tonight. I'm excited. And more than being excited, I feel a little heavy in terms of the material that we're sharing tonight. I also teach Black psychology and counseling psychology, in addition to race and cultural minorities. And so I've been doing this for over 10 years in terms of specifically looking at race and racial disparities. But I've been teaching at the college level for almost 15 years now. I'm dating myself, but I think—
Congratulations.
Thank you.
To being one that really sows back into people. That's what I would like to say.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that if we're going to have a conversation about race and racial disparities amongst minorities, and in particular African Americans, and I think we've got to start at the beginning. Anybody that knows me or has been in my classes, I'm always going to start with slavery because that's a part of our history. And if we don't learn from our history, we'll be forced to repeat it. And we've seen that for many years. So I'm going to go back a little bit. I know last week you looked at health disparities among African Americans, and particularly African American women. I want to go back a little further and just touch on that, not on that specifically, but in particular, when we look at the disparities amongst African Americans in general, you cannot look at that without looking at the disparities of the life expectancy for Black and white people in the U.S. And this is not a new phenomenon, right? So the medical treatment of African Americans since slavery and even during now has been what I think Tanya Bolash-Goza, who is the author of Race and Racisms, A Critical Approach, which I'm the editor for the third edition through Oxford Press, right? So what she says, the medical treatment of African Americans during and since slavery has been at best subpar and at worst deadly. So if we look back, when we talk about the devaluing of Black bodies, we've got to look into the history of the health disparities and medical care to gain insight into even present day inequalities. So last week you looked at the present day issues. Tonight I've got to scale it back a little bit and just look back. This has been going on since the 1820s and up into the 1970s, which has brought us where we are today. So when you look at the father, who America knows as the father of gynecology, right? His name is Dr. Thomas Hamilton. So enslaved Africans who escaped slavery, they lived to tell their story, right? And so the story that they told, their manuscripts. One of their names, his name was Fed, but when he left England or was taken from England, they called him John Brown, right? And so the father, we know a father of gynecology, of American gynecology, Dr. Thomas Hamilton, he cured Brown's former slave master of an illness, right? In exchange for being able to use Brown's Black body to do experimentation on certain illnesses. And the treatment that he underwent, and let's keep in mind, enslaved Africans didn't have a choice in terms of what to do with their bodies, right? They didn't have access to health care. And so this was an exchange between slave master and a doctor trying to practice medicine, right? And so when you look at the manuscripts of these slave narratives, and particularly John Brown of 1847, he says that Dr. Hamilton burned his skin to
Jesus.
see how deep Black skin went until you could see no more Black skin, right? So that was part of the experimentation. He didn't just do that. He also, let me read it here because I've read this from cover to cover, and it's an amazing book, Race and Racism. Everybody should have a copy, whether you're Black, brown, white, doesn't matter. So he burned his skin in an effort to see how deep his Black skin went, right? And then he also says that Dr. Hamilton also tried experiments upon me, which I cannot dwell upon. So that was quoted in 2006 by Washington. So his tactics were not an isolated case. You move to a female by the name of Anarcha. She was an enslaved African woman. She had a slave master who sold her and used her for Dr. Sims. She was one of 11 female slaves, right? He was trying, this doctor, Dr. Sims, he was trying to look at the fistula and why the vagina is torn during childbirth and how to stop that from happening, if we could say it like mildly like that. So under his care in 1844, 11 female slaves, they didn't have a choice, right? So they were held down on cold metal tables by white slave masters, and their vaginas were literally ripped open to do these experiments. And then they were stitched up and healed and then ripped open again. And when white slave masters could no longer stand the cries of these women and left the room and said, I don't want to be a part of this anymore, then the other 9 or 10 enslaved women were forced to hold down the one on the table. So then you go to these are the ones that we don't talk about in the classroom, right? These are the ones that don't get talked about in high school or in middle school. But this is where we started. So when you look at sterilization and African Americans, women's inability to conceive, far less likely than our white counterparts. You got to start here, right? So then we know about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, right? That's the one that everybody knows about. But I don't know if people know, and I posted this the other day to get us ready for tonight. This was 1932. When you look at the 400 poor Black men who were used for this long-term study, this wasn't a couple weeks, right? This was a long-term over many years. They were told that they had bad blood, which was a non-specific, non-medical term. But what they really had was syphilis, and these doctors were looking to cure, right? So if white men contracted syphilis, they'd be able to give them a cure or remedy immediately, right? So Black bodies have been devalued in America dating back to the 1820s in terms of health disparities, right? So these men, for the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, 400 poor Black men. So you're talking about being raced, classed, and gendered in America all the time, right? So in exchange for them being a part of this study, they were given free medical exams, free meals, and burial insurance, things that they desperately needed and couldn't say no to. So if I'm told I have bad blood and I revere you or reverence you or honor you as a doctor, you know more than me, and I don't have the money to pay you, I'm going to let you do whatever you need to do to cure me, not even realizing that you're lying to me, right? So now you move. Go ahead.
So much is popping through my head, but something you said right there is so important. When I don't know and I revere you to be the one who has the information that I don't have, I'm going to believe you. And I don't have money to do, or I'm thinking about the knowledge, because Dr. Chris said this last week, educate ourselves.
Yeah.
Educate. So I'm going to let you keep going, but I'm hearing this, and and the Lord is just really pricking my spirit about, one, we have lost our education. And so you were saying this is not taught. And I just heard something the other day where they were saying at certain schools or programs, they're saying, take some of this Black history out of our curriculum.
Oh, they're trying to do the whole critical race theory.
Yeah.
Because if we learn our history, then we'd really know the power that we possess as minorities, as African Americans, as Hispanics, as Asians, as Native Americans, and we wouldn't be forced to repeat what we're living through now. But we do not do our research. We are unwise consumers as Americans. But this is historical. This is systemic. This doesn't just start happening within the last 10 or 20 years. That's why I said we've got to go back to the 1800s. You can go back further than that, but that's where we started tonight. And with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, then I'll move on. These Black men were diagnosed with syphilis, but they were never told they had it, and nor were they treated for it. They were experimented upon, right? For the sake of, so I can find a cure, so that when those who are not in Black skin come with this disease, then I know how to treat them. The same with Anarcha, the enslaved, and the other 10 women that were laid on cold metal tables and had their vaginas open so that they could figure out and study how to keep the vagina and the fistula from tearing at childbirth, right? So there's been some real, harsh is not even the word, like deadly things and violence done against Black bodies since the 1800s. So this is not, this is, you fast forward to today, and that's why you have so much mistrust in our medical, field or doctor's offices among African-American men. You have African-American men in their 60s, 70s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s who won't even go to a doctor, who won't even go to from, even though they have insurance, because of the mistrust, because they know and if they're old enough, like my grandfather or, or my dad, they're old enough to remember the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. But when you hear the experiment, you don't even hear the word syphilis. You just hear the Tuskegee male experiment or Tuskegee men experiment. They leave out the word syphilis. So no, and these men had, splotches of syphilis all over their bodies, but they were told they had bad blood. So if we, if we're really going to be honest about, then do we know who Hottentot Venus is? Have you heard the name? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Hottentot, I'm so glad you said no. Hottentot Venus was a Black woman who was very voluptuous, as most Black women are, right? So she had huge breasts, she had beautiful curvaceous hips, a big plump apple bottom, and all of the things that now you have white women and other races wanting and cutting themselves up to get, right? They now think that this is beautiful, but this is something that this is the way we were made and endowed from creation, naturally, beginning of time, naturally, right? And so, but we've been made to feel ashamed about our bodies, and here's why. So Hottentot Venus was put on display in a museum, not as a statue. I'm talking about a real woman. So
Lord have mercy.
Whites could come up to a glass window, walking the streets. They could come into the building. They could poke fun. They could point. They could take pictures. Please look this up. Hottentot Venus was her name. That wasn't her real name, but that's what she was called. And so she was made to stand on display naked. She didn't have an option. She didn't have a choice. Nobody asked her, would you like to be a video vixen? Nobody asked her that, right? This was during a time where our bodies were not our own. And so if you move and you fast forward for today, then you have slut shaming of a Black woman who comes on camera, who might show a little cleavage, and all of a sudden she's called a slut or a whore, or she's made fun of because she has a certain title, and maybe that shouldn't be shown. But why can't she be proud of her body the natural way that God made her, right? So when you get into the psychology of the soul and the cognition and the way that we learn and our personalities as African Americans, we have so many layers of the past that really affect our present, that even affect our day-to-day relationships between mother and daughter, between husband and wife, between mother and son, between spousal relationships. The dynamic of the Black family has just been shattered from way back when, and that was intentional. And so, but we've got to know our history so that we know what to do with what's happening now, so that we can teach our children and say, and when we look at these health disparities, we've got to first note that they are clearly linked to socioeconomic status. Mm-hmm. When you look at the health disparities by ethnicity and race in America, it is clearly linked to socioeconomic status. Because if you are in a higher income bracket, then you have the ability to, you have a better paying job with benefits, right? You have better health insurance, and then you're more likely to trust that you're going to see a doctor who values you on site because you have a certain type of insurance, and most likely you are of a certain race or not of a certain race because you're in a higher income bracket. And because you're in a higher income bracket, statistically, you're going to live longer. You're going to live a more healthier lifestyle. But this is taken away from Black and brown bodies, right? Because we're in lower tax brackets, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I had to start with the health disparities before I could go into, housing or the labor market or mass incarceration, because I think it's important to start there and as a way to build up to the other things that we're going to talk about tonight.
This is really, really good. And I did put in the chat for the individuals to know about the things. I put the book in the chat so that they can know about that. And Professor Jones, I really appreciate you breaking down with this, with your historical research that you've done. And I really gonna order the book, not just because you were an editor in it, but because
But
I
it's
think
an
when,
amazing book.
you know, one of the things, and I know we're not trying to, we're talking history, not spiritual, but part of our spiritual admonishment from the Lord was to teach our children. And we often, you were saying something about mistrust. Well, one of the things we have failed to do is teach, and we wonder why our children don't respect our history, because we don't do it. We haven't taught them. We haven't passed it down. And we're saying, oh, they don't respect the price that, you know, our ancestors have paid. Well, we haven't taught them and we haven't passed it down, and they don't. I mean, I didn't remember about Hottentot Venus, but hey, I just looked it up. That's what I'm typing in. And I want those who are listening to see, if you see my head moving, my hands moving, because I am typing speedily to make sure that anything that is being said that you need to be able to follow up on. I want to make sure that whatever Professor Jones is giving us tonight, that I can also add to the chat, or I can follow up on, because and I love the way you're saying that we have to go back to go forward and understand where we are. We can't just say, hey, this is the issue. Well, how did we get here? How did we get here? And so to understand the things that you're saying will help us to understand, where did this start? We didn't just fall off a platform one day. It led from somewhere, and it led us to where we are. So please continue telling us, and as you're going into this housing thing, I'll make this comment, and then I'm going to let you keep going.
Mm-hmm.
I had someone ring my doorbell one day, young man, and it speaks again to what we haven't taught our young people, that they are capable of having. The community I live in, it's nothing fancy, by no means. It's nothing fancy. But he said, I didn't know Black people live out here. I said, excuse me?
Mm-hmm.
I said, it's a normal community. But when he rang my doorbell he was doing some sales pitch, it just floored me. And I said to him, I said, young man, as an African-American, a Black man, you can live anywhere your paycheck allows you, and as you work hard and you pay for it. Don't let anybody tell you a community is outside of your limits.
Well, I'm glad you said that because so that's a great segue, and I appreciate that. And it's sad that he said that, but that's the psychology of the minds of people who are not in Black skin or minority skin, right? Because we've been given such a fallacy in Hollywood, in the media. So okay, so let's go back to in terms of property and land ownership, and how did the Federal Housing Administration even began, right? Because that wasn't always in existence, right? So we live in a nation that creates laws and systems and Bill of Rights and amendments to keep those in power who are in white skin and predominantly male. We are in a patriarchal system, and so you can write the laws and change the rules to fit who you want, right? And so, and this is not something that just started. This is, again, we're going back to the 1800s, because I got to start there. So slaves, by definition, were unable to own property, any type of property, because we were property, right? And I say we because I'm in Black skin, even though I was not born a slave. But if we go back far enough, I can remember, my grandmother and great grandmother, my mom having these conversations, because it wasn't that far, before
removed, right?
Right. So I say we, but slaves by this definition were property and were not able to own property. So with freedom, right? Because we got to a point where we were free in 1863, 1865, right? So with freedom came a limited possibility for land ownership, right? So let me make you feel like you're free. So let me create a law that says, hey, in 1865, I'm going to pass the Freedmen's Bureau, right? and also the Freedman's Savings Bank, right? So hear this. These were two initiatives designed to help formerly enslaved people establish some financial independence. Okay. Um, but then in 1866, right, former enslaved people had another opportunity to acquire land, and that was the Southern Homestead Act, known as SHA, right? So we're coming up to FHA, but we're not there yet, right? So this reopened the doors for former slaves to apply for land. So you've got 1865 and then 1866, and black or enslaved Africans were now free, right? So let's set up a bank for them. Let's create a Freedman's Bureau. But is this really real? Is this really to create financial liberty or financial freedom for the enslaved? Or is it just to make the psyche of the Black man and the Black woman think that I'm trying to set you up to succeed? So if you move a little further, in 1872, Congress dismantled the Freedman's Bureau, completely did away with it, right? And so why did they do that? So let me read this. So the SHA allocated 46 million acres of public land for homesteading in 5 southern states. And listen for these states and what you know about the history of those states, and even today: Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Sounds like a straight setup to me, if you know anything that has gone down in those states in terms of slavery, right? So both Blacks and whites were permitted to apply for this land, much of which was not productive. And this is Kennedy, Reback, and Stowe in their research in about 2019. Right, this research is done. So in 1872, Congress dismantles the Freedmen's Bureau, and in 1874, the Freedmen's Bank failed because its all-white trustees issued speculative loans to white investors and corporations. And 60,000 Black people who had deposited more than $1 million, which in today's money is $20 million. So you have 60,000 Black people who have taken at face value this bill, this law that's been passed by Congress to say, we support you. You are now free. Put this money in a bank and we'll call it the Freedman's Savings Bank. But we really gonna steal your money in a few years, right? But we've been trusting people for so long. But our history has told us why are we so trusting? Why? So $20 million, 60,000 Black people put their money into this bank. This bank crumbles because Congress does away with the Bureau, the Freedman's Bureau, and all white trustees issue speculative loans to white investors and corporations. So 1/4 of Southern Black farmers that own their land. Now, this is Oliver and Shapiro's work, and they've done a lot of work in terms of, these are sociologists who have done a lot of work in terms of housing and residential segregation and inequality in housing and wealth. And so what ends up happening is these 60,000 Black folks lose their $2 million that they put into this bank. It's gone. So am I really free? Right? Or am I just, we've got to do our own research. So then we fast forward. This is the same nation where World War I, you have Black and whites who went to war for America. Black men were put on the front lines. A lot of our Black men, brothers, uncles, grandfathers, husbands didn't come home, right? They died in war. Those that came home, Black and white alike, were living in tents in parks and on streets because they didn't have any homes. They were away at war for a while, right? For years. And so the government said, well, we can't let these men just put up tents and this looks bad, right? This is all over the news. And so the FHA was created. And so the FHA was established in 1934. And the purpose of it was to bolster the economy, especially the construction industry. So if you ever look at wherever there's a deficit in our economy, something is created, whether it's a law or some type of system to bring about financial gain, but for whom? And I wish that we would be more wise in terms of consumers, because we had a time where we lived on Black Wall Street, where we put Black dollars into Black communities only. We went to Black barbershops, we had Black schools, we had those things, right? And that's why I'm so intentional throughout the year to make sure I'm investing my Black dollars into Black businesses, right? And so I can't always do it, right? But I try most of the time to do that because it's important. And so when we look at the FHA, the Housing Administration, remember 1934, the purpose of this, you had these men coming from home from war who were putting up tents and homes. And so FHA said, okay, we're going to bolster the economy. We're going to pour into the construction industry. This is going to boom and skyrocket. And again, we're going to tell Blacks and whites that they can buy these homes that we've put up, right? So this, remembering the Freedmen's Bureau, but we're still trusting, because this is what the government has told us, that we're able to achieve. So banks use FHA guidelines to decide who should be permitted to borrow money, right? And the 1938 underwriting manual of the FHA states that if a neighborhood is to retain stability, it is necessary that properties shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. That was written into law. This is the history of our nation. This is the history of our medical, of everything that we've ever done. And so when you look at the manual, the underwriting of FHA, right? So between 1933 and 1978, now I'm a 70s baby. So now you're talking about the cusp of when I was born, right? The U.S. government policies enabled over 35 million families to increase their wealth through housing equity. But was it really equity, right? Was it really? Because if I tell you I've created this, the banks are backing it, and white families are told they can now buy a home for $20,000 or $10,000 in 1930s, 1940s. Black families are told you can now buy a home for $60,000 or $80,000, and the rates were so much higher for Black families to keep them out of white neighborhoods, because it was already written in the manual. This is how we set it up. This exists today. So white families bought homes for $10,500. They bought homes for $10,500. Those families died and left those houses to their children. Those children, made remodeling, fixed it up, did whatever, took the equity out of the house and bought new houses, and they died and they left those houses, those homes to their children. So now you're talking about generational wealth that Black folks have been left out of for decades, for centuries. Because if I tell you we've built homes for 35 million Americans, and Black folks, you now have a slice of the pie, where are you going to get $50,000 from? Where are you going to get $40,000 from as a Black person in the 1930s? You're not, right? So, but I know this as a bank. I know this as Congress. I know this. So the disadvantages or the disparities and the mass injustice against Black bodies didn't just start with a certain political campaign. This goes back to the 18 and 1900s. And if we don't know this history, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. We're doing our children a disservice. We don't sit down at the kitchen table with our Black and brown babies and say, hey, this is what was going on when I was a kid, or when your grandparents were kids, or when their grandparents were, and this is where we are now. And I need you to be smart about the market, and I need you to be smart about where you put your money, right? So
you just said something that I'm listening to everything that we're talking about, history, what has happened and what's going on. And one of the things that I thought of just what you said. Hey, I want you to know this is what happened, and I need you to be smart, because a lot of this happened, is happening, going to keep happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I won't say but, because sometimes but erases. And with all of that knowledge gives us the power. You said it before, we have power. The knowledge increases our power. So I think knowing this gives us the power to know how to navigate moving forward. I think knowing, even my grandsons now, I still have to teach them that there is racial profiling of a young Black man, that you're not free just because we're living in the almost, we're living in the 21st century or whatever century we're looking at. And no, it's still, and you still have to be careful. You still have to be wise. My skin may be fairer than somebody else's, but that doesn't mean that I get to drive a decent car and I'm not going to be looked at like, oh, what is she doing? So let's just throw this out here. If I drive down the street in a BMW late at night, I might get in a certain neighborhood, I may get pulled over because I am still in this brown skin. But that, knowing this, and I have to pass on the knowledge, so I now know how to navigate. I now know how to do something different. I now know how to ask the right questions if I'm going to purchase a house, purchase land. I just don't go for, this is what you're telling me it is. I need to understand all these little nuances about real estate, about purchasing, about being a consumer. I think it doesn't mean we can't have. It means we need to be wise about what we do and how we do it.
Right. And it does, and you're right. It doesn't mean that we can't have, but you're gonna work like hell to get it. And what are you really working so hard to achieve? Are you really trying to achieve the American dream, right? Or because, so let's look at systemic racism, because that's exactly what you're talking about when you talk with your grandson. This is where it starts. So Joe Fegan, Dr. Joe Fegan, he's a sociologist. He defines systemic racism as a diverse assortment of racist practices, the unjustly gained economic and political power of whites, the continuing resource inequalities, and the white racist ideologies, attitudes, and institutions created to preserve white advantage and power. Right. So he's explaining that systemic racism encompasses daily microaggressions, right? When border microaggressions, those are the little racial slurs and little racial slights that are said in the presence of Black folks, right? Or even behind the backs of Black folks, where we normally hear them. Deep-seated inequalities and anti-Black theologies or ideologies, right? And if we look at what systemic racism includes, it's patterns of unjust impoverishment of non-whites. It's vested group interests of whites to maintain racism. I mean, this is what we're talking about. It's omnipresent and routinized discrimination against non-whites. It's rationalization of racial oppression. There's always a justification. Well, this is why we're doing it this way, right? And an imbalance of power, where whites are able to reproduce inequality through control of major political and economic resources that Blacks and brown and minorities just don't have. But why not, right? So, when you look at there's a study of wealth inequalities in Washington, D.C. This is done by Kajikazi and some colleagues of 2016, right? So we're not talking about less than the last 10 years, right? This is recent research. They found that white households have, on average, a net worth that is 81 times greater than that of Black households. Not 18%. I said 81 times greater, right, than that of Black households. The nation's capital is 47.7% Black, 35.7% white, 10.4% Latinx, and 3.7% Asian. The study found substantial wealth disparities by race and ethnicity. The median net worth, the sum of all assets less than the value of debts for white households, was $284,000 compared with $13,000 for Latinx households, $3,500 for U.S. Black households, and $3,000 for African households. Korean and Asian, Indian and Vietnamese households all had a median net worth of over $400,000 higher than that of the average white household. Their research further found that even highly educated Black families have less wealth on average than white families. For white households headed by an individual with a high school diploma or less education, right? The average net worth was $265,000 compared with $130,000 for a Black household headed by an individual with a graduate degree. So this is not opinion. This is factual, analyzed, researched data that has gone before an institutional review board to check for bias, to check for opinion, and all of that has been removed. And these are the bare bone facts. This is why I love this book, because Dr. Golash Boza does an incredible job of just giving you the facts, just like Michelle Alexander did with the new Jim Crow. So when we really look at education, when we look at housing and environmental justice or injustices, all of this is intentionally done against brown and Black bodies to maintain the dominant white political powers of those in power. I mean, right? So because if I truly make the Freedmen's Bureau and give you a bank and truly want to free and give you a political seat at the table, or at the table in terms of money, in terms of health, in terms of, just your daily mental well-being, then I'm not writing laws against you. I'm writing them to support you. And it should be equity across the board for all. We don't live in that type of nation. This is America. Childish Gambino told us the best with his song, "This is America." That's how I start every one of my classes. On the first day of class, I play that song as my students are entering, because they know it. They know the lyrics. They hear the beat. But what is he really saying? This is what's going on in the nation, where you have people who are leaving their nations, who are coming to this country because they think that where they're coming from is so much worse than here. But I think what they're really going to find out is, I wish I had stayed where I was. I talk to my students every day who are not from here, and they're like, it's hard being in America. I'm not treated fairly. I'm not, okay, well, welcome to our world. But for whatever reason, you see, Hollywood has made it look like, and the media has made it look like this is the best place. And I'm not saying I'm not glad to be an American. I am. However, let's keep it real. Let's give the facts, right? Whites and Blacks at similar income levels tend to have vastly different wealth portfolios. One reason is that whites are more likely to have jobs with benefits. Whites are therefore less likely to dip into their savings for medical emergencies, and their employers are more likely to be contributing to a retirement plan. This was Shapiro's research and some other colleagues in 2013. Black people also tend to be in more precarious employment situations, and are more likely to lose their jobs. When unemployment rose from 5% in December 2007 to 9.5% in June of 2009. Latinx and Black earners were hit the hardest, with Black unemployment rates peaking at 15.6% and the Latinx rate at 12.6% in 2009. We're not talking about 50, 100 years ago. We're talking about very recent. So, and in terms of inheritance, when you look at FHA and when it was created in 1934, and how whites have always had a leg up, in this nation, the American ideology is pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Well, how the hell can I do that if I don't even have boots on to begin with? Forget that part. I don't even have the boots. I'm barefooted, and my toenails have been ripped off and they're bleeding. So I'm limping, and this is the state, right? This is where we are. In 2013, a study by Shapiro and his colleagues found that 36% of white households inherited some money over the 25-year period under the study, compared to only 7% of Black households. So now you're talking about inheritance. So the inheritances of Black households received were on average only about 10% of the amount inherited by white households. And so then you're talking about legacy, the legacy of inequality in the United States. So if I'm scrimping and scraping to make ends meet, and I'm working a job, but I don't have job security, I don't have a 401k, I don't have benefits, I'm just scrimping by, and I'm trying to feed my kids, I'm trying to keep my mental together, I'm trying to check on my health every now and then, which is lacking because I don't have insurance, or if I have it, I'm having to pay for it. That's more money, taking money, money out of the mouth that I'm trying to feed my kids. Where do I ever have a chance to build a savings to leave an inheritance for my children?
Right.
Especially when in 1934, I didn't get the luxury of having property and assets and wealth passed down to me in a will. I didn't get that luxury. So
it sounds very cyclical, and it sounds very trying to think of the word where it just continues. It's like the cycle continues, and it's somewhere we have to figure out what can we do, because I just hear it leads. One thing has led to the next, is what I'm hearing from what you're saying and what you're sharing tonight. One thing has led to the next, and we just have to figure out a way. Wait a minute. I know this is what this leads to. So where do I go, and how do I shift this? But I definitely want you to keep going. We have probably about 30 more minutes, but I definitely want you to get into this part that leads to our labor and our mass incarceration, because as you know, mass incarceration is a big one for me.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
For both of us.
Yeah. but more for you than for me. But yes, I just teach it. You live it by going into the prison system on a daily or weekly basis, empowering women who look like us, who find themselves behind bars. And I'll give you some stats in a minute about where we are now in terms of mass incarceration. But if we back up a little bit to the labor market, then you will get a better understanding as to why the mass incarceration of Black bodies and brown bodies is the way it is today. So when you look at overall inequality and how it's exacerbated by inequality distributed along racial and ethnic lines, right? So Black and Latino families in the United States own just 9% of wealth for every white dollar. Like, I gotta say it again. Black and Latino families in the United States own just 9% of wealth for each dollar white families own. And this is research done in 2020. So that's not even 5 years ago, because we just entered 25, right? So this is Kahn, Skoloric, and Stein who did this research in 2020. So in terms of income, the median income of white workers in the United States has been higher than that of Black workers for as long as income data has been tracked. I guess I'm trying to paint the picture that this is not new. Even though we might be hearing it for the first time, this dates back for centuries, not decades. This predicament we've been in for a long time. But there was a time for Black folks that we had our own, because we did our own research. We wised up and said, hey, I'm tired of being lied to. I got to do something about this. And that's what you just said a minute ago. And so there was a time where our cognition, the way we learned, the way we studied, the way we thought about ourselves, the way we worship, the way we, commune, in terms of community, it was solid, it was healthy, it was strong.
Yes.
We got to that point, right? And we built banks, we built schools, we had barbershops. If you look at your own family lineage, even in my family, we have, preachers who built their own churches. We have barbershops, black barbers who started their own barbershops and, built buildings and bridges and all these things. So it's not like we don't have the power and the potential. But if you tell a people long enough, Hottentot Venus, right? So if you tell a people long enough, Anarcha, Fed, whose name was changed to John Brown, if you tell a people long enough, you ain't worth nothing. You are the beast of the field. You're not even human. You don't even have a soul, which is why W.E.B. Du Bois wrote The Souls of Black Folks, right? If you begin to believe the lies that you see, and these are further enforced stereotypes about Black and brown bodies that are enforced by the media, that are enforced by politics, that are enforced by, let's just be honest, that are enforced by churches, that are enforced by religious entities, that are enforced by sitcoms and even this is
absolutely.
This is skin deep, and let's be clear about what we're saying. So when we talk about the median income of white workers in the United States has been higher than that of Black workers for as long as income data has been tracked. This is forever and always it has been happening. So if we really knew this and took this, when people tell you who they are, believe them.
Believe them.
When you look at the data, believe it. This is not opinion. This is statistically backed research, which is why I have been a researcher since I got out of college. I've been doing this work forever because your opinion doesn't matter. Like, I value you, but what are the facts? Let's stick to the facts, right? It's the same with God, because I gotta always, that's I fall back on that. God is not really concerned about our opinion. He's concerned about everything that happens with us, right? But he doesn't have to respond to our opinion. He's got to respond to his word, right? Because that's his, he has to respond to the facts of his word. What does the word say? Yes. So if you pray God back the word of God, you'll get an instant response. But if you go, because the word says, I don't like murmuring, complaining, that's opinion, right? Oh God, what was me? I feel bad about this. But if we give the word, so if you give the facts of what does the research show, then I might be voting different. I might be living my life differently. I might be involved in different programs. I might be trying to eliminate systemic racism on an individual level. I might be trying to eliminate environmental injustices in my community. I might be trying to clean up my city or feed thousands of people who are making the choice to buy prescriptions, feed their grand and great grandbabies because their sons and daughters are incarcerated and can't afford to buy a $6 carton of milk, gallon of milk, or a $6 carton of eggs. So, what are we really talking about when people are saying, oh, well, y'all are always complaining about, well, Black this and Black and Black lives matter and Black bodies matter. We've heard it all, right? Well, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. But there is a wage gap between men and women in the United States, not just Black and white households or Black and white workers. If we further race, class, and gender this out, because when we talk about intersectionality, right, you hear this word a lot, but what does it mean? It means the real lived experience of, I am a Black woman. You are a Black woman. We are of a certain age, a certain faith. We're in a certain class, right? I'm in the working class. Most of America would love to believe that they are in the middle class because it just sounds good. But if you scale back the numbers, most of us are the working class. 1% of the wealth is held by, all the wealth, or most of the wealth is held by 1% of people in the of the world, right? Of the United States, rather. So if we're looking at wage gap and income gap when we talk about the labor market, we can't just look at Black and white. We've also got to look at gender. We've also got to look at the disparities of labor divided by men and women, right? So when we break this down, Weiss which this research was done in 2020, there's a wage gap between men and women in the United States. Women earn on average 82 cents an hour for each dollar that men earn. This is 2020 data. When you look at white women earn 79 cents for each dollar that white men make. However, Black women make 62 cents for each dollar that white men make. And Native American women only 57 cents. So when you analyze racial inequity in terms of the labor market, what are we really saying? There is no pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and there is no there's no fairness in terms of if I'm making, you know, way less on the dollar than a white male and a white woman, right? So then how can I save? How can I put my kids through college? What does that do to my psychological, emotional, physical? Because we are a total person, right? So you put 4 or 5 people in a room with a doctor, and they all are complaining that their pain is at a 10, right? Because you go to the doctor, that's the first thing they ask you, where's your level of pain today from 0 to 10? A Black woman might say, my pain is at a 12, right? A white woman may say, oh, my pain is at a 4, but I'm having some discomfort, you know, of this, that, and the third. A white man may say, I'm not really feeling any pain. I just feel a little congestion. I've had this persistent cough, right? An Asian male might say, I don't have any pain. I just came because I'm here for my, you know, yearly checkup. The doctor who's not culturally sensitive, right? Who is not looking for any type of cultural competency as a doctor at all to know every issue that ails these 4 or 5 people in the room, is going to look at the Black woman and run all these tests on her. It's been done for me. I promise you. This is not something that I read. This is life experience. This is intersectionality of being both Black and female and Christian and, you know, middle-aged or almost middle-aged, all happening at the same time. You can't isolate them. You can't just say, well, today I'm just a female. I can't do that. All of these come with me just like they come with you on a daily basis. That's the intersectionality of it. But the doctor will say to the Black woman, well, all your labs came back fine. Your tests are fine. There's nothing wrong with your heart. Your EKG was fine. There's nothing wrong with you. So go home. But her pain is still at a 12. Why? Because she's dealing with this, all of this that we're talking about on a daily basis. Same for the African-American male. And it's greater for him because he's demonized on sight by the police, by his own people, by the educators in the room, by the doctor, so on and so forth. So 1 in 3 Black men born in the 21st century can expect to spend some time in prison during his lifetime. And this is Marr and King in 2007. Why is that? How did that happen? We get into now into mass incarceration, because I think this is so important. We've got to look at where we started, because Black and brown folks didn't just start getting locked up, right? So there has been strategic, when you talk about looking at the turn of the century, W.E.B. Du Bois likened the prison system to slavery in private hands. That's 1904, he wrote that. Slavery in private hands. One of my most favorite authors, him, James Cone, I could just list them all. Michelle Alexander. These Black folks this is why I'm now teaching African American literature, and schools are now calling and saying, we don't even want to see your syllabus. Get this, Dr. Vera, Pastor Vera. Listen, we don't want to
claim that.
And I wanted to write that so bad today when I posted our thing. It's coming. My prayer for you is that, and I feel the Holy Ghost on this, a university is going to see what you're putting out, and they're going to give you an honorary doctorate, because you don't need to go to school for this. Do your research. You know what I mean? You've been doing it. You've been living it. But W.E.B. Du Bois, 1904, says that the prison system is slavery in private hands. So let's talk about for a second how did we get here? I've always got to go back, and this is what my students are always learning. How did we get here in terms of mass incarceration of Black and brown bodies? Well, if you look at the U.S. incarceration rate was 1 per 1,000 residents for almost the entire 20th century until the 1970s. That rate doubled between 1972 and 1984, and again between 1984 and 1994. By the end of the 20th century, the United States had an unprecedented number of inmates, over 2 million, more than 10 times the number of U.S. inmates at any time prior to the 1970s. Today, the American criminal justice system holds about 2.3 million people in 1,833 state prisons, 110 federal prisons, 1,772 juvenile correctional facilities, 3,134 local jails, 218 immigration detention facilities, and that number has skyrocketed as of lately, and 80 Indian country jails, as well as in military prisons, civil commitment centers, state psychiatric hospitals, and prisons in the United States territories. And this is Sawyer and Wagner's research from 2020. I'm not giving you data anymore from 1930 or 1800s. We're talking about 2020. We just touched 2025. We're still in the month of January. The increase in incarceration cannot be explained by the rise in crime, as crime rates have fluctuated independently of incarceration rates. And that's from Waquant and Gottschalk from 2009 and 2015, because we've seen a decrease in crime at various decades, but we've seen an increase of incarceration of Black and brown bodies. So listen to this. In terms of race and mass incarceration, these are the prison walls that you go into on a weekly basis as you are ministering to Black women who are now, I'm going to give you that in a minute. I don't want to tell you about the Black women. Let me get back to that. Although 13% of the population of the United States is Black, so 13% of the U.S. population is Black. Black people make up 30% of those imprisoned. So wow. 13% of us living and breathing in America, residing, paying tax dollars in America, but 30% of us are imprisoned. Hispanics account for about 18% of the U.S. population, but represent 22% of the nation's prison population. That's Covera's data from 2019. At year-end 2017, the imprisonment rate of Black males was 2,336 per every 100,000 in the population, as compared to 397 per 100,000 white males. So this tells us that Black males were 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than their white male counterparts by the end of 2017. 6 times more likely. Why? How did that happen? Let's go back to when Reagan was in office. The war on drugs. That was the 1980s, somewhere around there. The war on drugs had, let me give you a specific date. I'll come back to the date in a second. But the war on drugs, yes, 1980s. I got it. So 1980s was the rise of the crack and cocaine epidemic, right?
Right.
Or you could say epidemic, because it was just in the U.S. It hadn't spread, across countries. But who was buying crack? Who could afford to buy crack? Because cocaine was expensive. So cocaine was a white drug. White folks could afford to buy cocaine, right? They were having parties, shooting up, getting high, whatever. Black folks were shooting up and smoking crack.
Correct.
And dying and ODing like never before. This is the 80s, the war on drugs. So Reagan, with his administration, says, okay, let's create Reaganomics. You remember that? And within Reaganomics, there was laws written for mass incarceration of Black bodies because it was tied to the consumption and the purchasing and the selling and the possession of crack, not
Yep.
cocaine. This is intentional. So this is going back to the 80s, which we got a lot of 80s babies. So this is not that long ago, right? Those babies are now millennials, right? This is our millennials were babies back then. But so if you look at this, when you talk about 397 per 100,000 whites are being incarcerated versus 2,336 Black men were being incarcerated, and that was 2017. Those rates have changed. So Reaganomics said that for 10 grams of crack, which was not enough for distribution, that was for personal consumption, right? So you know how now marijuana is legal, and if you have 10 grams or more, it doesn't matter. It's legal now, right? But that's a money thing. But back then, during Reagan's administration, he said, I want all these people off the streets. Why? And again, W.E.B. Du Bois said it's slavery in private hands. What happens in the prison system? Why are we building prisons quicker than we're building homes or schools or recreation centers, right? Maryland just spent, I don't know how many millions of dollars to build a huge prison, right? Why are we not using that to pour into our children? And you could look at Texas, California, Rhode Island, any of them. We're throwing up prison systems and juvenile detention centers quicker than we can build schools, right?
And universities.
Or how about let's put air conditionings and heating units in our public schools, because our babies don't have heat in the winter and air conditioning in the summertime. So schools are closing because it's too hot in the summer for them to learn, and too cold in the winter for them. So we'll lessen the number of days that we educate them, because the school system was never created to educate. So if we go back a little further, and I'll come back to mass incarceration, but if you go back if you look at the history of our nation in terms of the school system, when we complain about, well, the school system is not educating our children, it wasn't created to educate. It was created in terms of the war, when white men went off to war, and white women were in the homes with their babies, and who was going to work in the factories to operate the machinery of the factories to keep the rate of production going. So women were forced into the labor market. They were forced into the factories. Well, who was going to watch their babies? So women were bringing their babies into the factories, and babies were losing limbs because they were babies. They were kids. They were sticking their hands in machinery where it didn't belong. They were crawling all over the place. So the factory owners, the government, the powers that be, the ones that own the means of production, said, let's create a school to house these babies during the day while these women work, while their husbands are off to war, right? Because war generates money and brings in income and bolsters the economy. So let's create a schoolhouse for these children and train them how to use the machinery, so that when the husbands come back from war, the wives can go back into the household where they belong, right? And the children will by then be of age to go into the factories and work alongside their fathers. That's why schoolhouses were created. So when you complain about your school system not doing your child justice, it was never created to educate, except for the mass production of this capitalistic society. This is America. And so when you look at, there's a 6-to-1 ratio of Black men are more than 6 times likely to be incarcerated. And you fast forward from Reaganomics, who gave 5 to 10 years for 10 grams of crack. Who was smoking crack? Blacks at unprecedented rates. Why did Black people run to drugs? Because it was too difficult to cope with all of these stats that we're talking about right now. They lived it. Their parents lived it. They're being raised by mothers and fathers who didn't have the coping mechanisms, didn't have the vocabulary to sit down with their kids. They were trying to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. And so Then you fast forward, and I can only share about Maryland because this is my context right now. You fast forward to the early 2000s or late 90s. So Reagan was the 80s, right? Then you fast forward to Donald Schaefer, who in Maryland and particularly in Baltimore said, whenever you see anybody standing out on the corners, don't ask them no questions, pick them up and put them in jail. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's what happened under Donald Schaefer's administration, right? So this is very political. This is what has always happened. And if you know anything about Black community and Black neighborhoods, and it takes a village, we love standing outside and talking with one another
Congregating
and
and chatting and
congregating and eating and sharing food and playing games and playing cards, and
music and
music. That's us. So if you were standing on the corner, you weren't asked any questions. It was assumed you were demonized on sight. It was assumed that you were selling drugs because of Reaganomics from the 80s. This is now, we're talking about the 90s, and we'll bring it up to 2000. So you were immediately incarcerated, and they couldn't build the jails fast enough. So now, instead of Black men being 6 times more likely to be incarcerated by, instead of their white male counterparts, now Black women are the number one in terms of highest incarceration rates in the United States of America. Black women. Why is this so problematic? Because slavery already dismantled the Black household, right? So
yes.
if we look at the slave master, and the easiest way for me to strip you of your power and your your mindset of that you are strong, you are beautiful, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, you are gorgeous, everything about you, your melanin, your skin, you're smart. In order to break that psyche, because we came from kings and queens, let's be clear, in the cradle of civilization. So when you look at the Willie Lynch letters, Willie Lynch was a slave owner who had figured out how to destroy the psyche of his enslaved, of those he enslaved. But other slave owners, their enslaved persons were giving them the blues. They were fighting back. They were killing their slave masters. They weren't working. And they were like, we don't know what to do with these people. You've told us that we can own them because they're not human. But so Willie Lynch put out this letter that, if we were using our word today, that went viral, right? So it went out to every slave owner in the nation. And his letter told them how to get into the psyche of the enslaved African and to break them down and to pin husband against wife. So we always talk about.
I just got to chill. And I will tell you why.
Yeah.
Because it's still going on today. And we allow individuals and we allow the enemy to still do it today.
Yeah.
Help us, Lord.
So if I want to destroy everything about you and everything you think that you know or feel about yourself, I've got to get into your mind, the psychology of the soul, your mind, your will, and your emotions. The will of Black folks is strong, and that's how God created us to be. We are a strong people, but we've been broken down systematically over time.
Yes.
And so this is why when you introduce a drug into the streets, and that doesn't just come from, somebody on the corner, that's coming from, that's to pass through customs, immigration, that's coming from here. And I don't want to name, names, but
right.
So, but if I break and I pin you, so if you look at slavery, and we know that slave masters were raping enslaved women, right? They're slave, and they had children, but right. So then you get colorism, because colorism says that within a race of brown or dark skin, lighter is better, right? So then I will rape your wives, your daughters, your nieces, right? Your sisters, your and produce seed, because I know that some of them are going to come out looking a little lighter like me, and then I can pin you against each other. I can put the lighter skin slaves in the house and give them less things to do, and put the darker skinned slaves in the field and beat them to death. So when you finally all come into the house together, you looking at each other sideways like, how you get to be in here with master and I'm out here and my hands are bloody because I've been picking cotton all day and you sitting here making biscuits. So now we've put light against dark, and you still see it today. You see it across Asia, you see it across Africa, India, with the lightning creams. Everyone wants to be dark, wants to be lighter, right? You see that, systemically across cultures. But what we don't talk about, and research has been done on this topic, but you never hear about the slave masters who raped our fathers, our brothers, our uncles, our grandfathers. Because how do I strip a Black man of his dignity in front of his wife, in front of his babies? So now pillow talk is no pillow talk between husband and wife, because I couldn't save you, you couldn't save me, and we can't even talk about this thing. So now you fast forward to today, there's no conversation between Black men and Black women, because since the 1800s, we have not had the vocabulary to talk to one another. So now we're behind bars. And why is this so problematic for not just the Black family? This is problematic for society. Asian, Native American, Black, Latinx, white. This is problematic for everybody, because fathers are now removed from homes. Now mothers are now removed from homes. Now mothers are having their babies behind prison walls, and their babies are snatched from their vaginas and put in the foster care system, or families are having to go through custody battles. So there's no reconciliation of the Black family, and we don't talk about these things. We don't talk to our children to say, this is why auntie and uncle don't get along. It ain't because they don't love each other. This thing goes back skin deep. And maybe I need to write the book about that, but we don't talk about that. We don't talk about it because it's so painful. And there's shame and guilt. There's no shame in it. We didn't do this to ourselves. We didn't ask for this. But how do we correct it, right? Because and it starts with the work that you're doing in the prison system. It continues with the work that I'm doing in Baltimore and across the world in terms of feeding families who just are impoverished and forgotten about. And so if we all take a look at the facts, not opinion, not, well, Black folks, y'all so aggressive. Y'all just angry, bitter Black people or Black women. You have all these stigmas and all these stereotypes.
So tired of hearing that.
But no one's taking time to get to know us and to find out why, right? Why is it that I make less than you and I have more education than you do? Why, right? Why is it that at times I feel bad about my body when I know I'm beautiful? But don't think that those whispers don't come up. Oh, you're too fat. You're too this. And I have to try to silence them.
Why do you dress like that?
Right. Why is that? So, I mean, this is America. This is where we are. And that real lived experience of the intersectionality of being in Black and brown skin on a daily basis is hell on wheels. And to try to keep our mental health together. And as I told my students Monday morning, if you are Black in America, you are in Black skin, you belong in therapy. It should not even be a question of the stigma. Oh, well, you must be psychotic. You must be schizophrenic. You must be bipolar. That's why you need to see a therapist. No, I'm Black. I need to see a therapist. I need somebody to talk to me about all of the ills and all of the things that are going on a daily basis up here and in here, because I'm in this.
Yes.
My education, my housing, my environment. most blacks and brown people live in a food desert in an inner city where there are no fresh produce and fresh organic meats. They can't get to the Wegmans and the Whole Foods and the right. There's a corner store on every corner, and maybe a McDonald's and a Chinese joint selling greasy food with old dirty oil, with canned goods that are high in salt, which is why African Americans have the highest rates of diabetes and
You're telling so much truth.
Cardiovascular disease and congestive heart failure. But this is intentional. This is intentional. But this goes
and
back
Walmart, and then we have to pay the cost to go to here is HEB or Tom Thumb, because everything at Walmart is outdated, fruit rotten, and it's like.
But where are our grocery stores? Because we had them. Where are Black-owned grocery stores? And I know that some of them exist, but where are they in grave numbers and vast numbers? Where are our libraries? Where are our schools? When are we going to stop being unwise consumers and being so trusting that when the government puts out something and says, "Oh, this bill is for you," we've been there, done that. It's not for you. It's not. Like, when do we create our own? And I think we are beginning to wake up and be culturally sensitive. We need more history lessons like these. We do. Yes. Because this is not taught at our kitchen table, and it's not taught in our schools. And as you know, they are trying to desperately get rid of critical race theory in schools. But this needs to be taught. Yeah. If you're white, you need to know it more so than African Americans, because the wage of whiteness in terms of, white ideologies and anti-blackness, right? Because if you are in white skin, you should be using your privilege for good to help those who are in non-white skin. If we're really going to talk about equitable justice for housing, education, criminal justice system, and all of the above, everything we've talked about tonight, and then there's so much more, right? We could only scale the tip of the iceberg, but this message is not just for Black people. This is for everybody. Across every race, across every ethnicity, because it impacts all of us.
Yes. Well, Professor Jones, this has been so educational. And I so much appreciate you sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your data, and what I appreciate so much is that it's not just, oh, you coming off the cuff with your opinion. Because like you said, everybody has an opinion. Everybody has something they believe in, but you came on and you shared research and facts. And that has been so eye-opening. So, it's like taking a book and just open it and allowing the listeners, those who have watched tonight. We've had a bunch of people on tonight watching. Those I'm sure going to watch throughout the weeks, and wherever they're going to watch this broadcast. This has been so informative. I so much appreciate you. You're my sister, my friend, my ace. But in this aspect, you have been just so. This has been so good, and I can't thank you enough. You've said so many good things that I'm going to have to go back and watch it and listen to it again and be able to write down some notes. And everybody who's listening here tonight, I put in there where you can get racism. I actually put the link to the book, Race and Racism. I went on to the website and put right there where you can just go. All you have to do is look in the chat, click the link so that you can get the book. We actually own the book that she's talking about, Souls of Black Folks. That's one of my husband's favorite books. When I met him, he has a lot of those books, because understanding our history is so important. I just don't even know what else to say, but thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And I admonish you to keep going. Don't let anyone stop you. I know you won't, because girl, you're like a train. And if someone get in your path, they're going to get knocked off the tracks. But I just pray that God will continue to bless your work, bless your hands, open the doors for you to continue teaching this amazing knowledge that you have, that a lot of us haven't even dug deep enough to understand or remember. Some of the things that we've learned, we forgot. But wherever I can do to just keep spreading the knowledge. I just appreciate you for doing that. It's been an amazing segment. So I love you and appreciate you.
Thanks. Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
What for you was one thing that really stood out for you, and why, in terms of what we talked about tonight?
Oh my gosh, it was so much. Because I did know about all the the racism with the labor market. I knew about I do understand about mass incarceration, but even when you went back to the housing market, all the way back to that some of that data I did not know. Some things you even talked about with the health, with the OBGYNs, like the experiments from that. So that was very informative, of the experiments they did on the slaves. Some of that I did not know. It's just been so many like tidbits. So I was sitting here like probably too close to my screen. So I was sitting here with my face like plugged in, but it was a lot of all of that knowledge. So even for the era, the time and the periods that I knew, I grabbed something from each phase. I will say something that it invigorated me even more. I think you and I were talking about this a little bit, that I've been lately really getting back to self-care, and not just self-care, but self-care as a Black woman. Because I just keep hearing these things about, I just keep getting this, that, people say things, the microaggressions and things that people say, and I don't know whether it is intentional or sometimes maybe it's not, but I think, and then people say, well, maybe you're just too sensitive. I'm not too sensitive. There are people need to learn, just like you said, what you said is not just for our race, it's for other races, so they can understand that they need to probably be culturally sensitive. One of the things, Professor Jones, that I try to do is understand another culture that I'm working with. So I don't say and I don't do things that could possibly be offensive. And I don't think people do give us that same respect. They just
don't care.
Do it.
They don't care.
Right. But if I'm working with an Asian, I try to be culturally sensitive to some of their teachings and their behavior, so that I can respect that. And we don't get that same respect. We get that just, and they just keep throwing and passing, and we're supposed to do so. It just invigorated me a little bit. It gave me a little bit more fuel to keep being me unapologetically. And I know people are probably going to be tired of me saying that this year, but I will say this. I am on a trajectory this year to be who I am supposed to be in this Black skin, without anyone telling me that I can't be. And it may cost some people and some friends, but I love me.
Apology.
Yes. And I'm not going to apologize, because they don't know what it cost me to be this. They don't know what it cost me to walk with my head hung up. There was a time I surveyed my shoes, but people don't know what it cost me not to look at my shoes and to walk with my back straight, and not to walk with like I'm a slave with my head hung down in shame. I don't have to do that. I don't have to be ashamed that I'm a Black woman, a brown skinned woman, that I'm educated. I don't have to take your flack, or you make comments to me like I don't know how to count. I don't know how to read. I'm a well-educated Black woman.
Yeah. Yeah. And most of the time we have more education than the ones that are stating those microaggressions. And what you are talking about is implicit bias. Because you said, I don't know why people, think that we just have to take this, and they say these little things and they're not even aware, or they are aware. But implicit bias explains that, we all have biases at some subconscious level. But in terms of the stereotypes that are out there about Black and brown bodies or Black and brown people, take, for example, an employer. An employer can get two resumes. One can say Keisha Washington, the other can say Emily Walsh. And without even being aware that they're doing so, that resume that says Lakeisha Washington on it is going in file 13 most of the time. And Emily Walsh is going to get a call, but guess what? Lakeisha Washington has a master's degree. Emily Walsh has a high school diploma. Don't matter. That's implicit bias off the cuff. I already on site dislike you because I haven't taken the time to get to know you for myself. I've only looked at the images that have been put out there about you historically. So it doesn't matter what you bring to the table on paper. I had a white woman call me the other day from a 4-year college and said, I don't even need to interview you. Somebody slipped me your CV. I want you to teach 2 of my classes, and she's a department chair. I don't need to see your syllabus. I said, well, when do you need my syllabus? I don't need your syllabus. You don't even need to teach the class the way it's been taught. We want you to teach it from scratch. You write and build the class yourself. These are the calls that I'm getting now. But still, because I'm in Black skin and I'm a female, they are not willing to hire me full-time. They will let me come in an adjunct. So now the conversation for me needs to be, if you value what I bring to the table, I'll teach 1 class. Get the reviews back from the students. And if you really value what I bring, I need a full-time tenure track
appointment.
Yeah, because I've been doing this for 15 years and I've been adjuncting. And part of it is so I could do full-time ministry. But I am tired of having to go to bat while young white males sit in my class and are mad because there's a Black educated woman in front of them. And the same with some of the young white women, but it's normally young white males who challenge me and go to the dean and say all kinds of craziness. And it's not at every school. It's just at some schools, some of the most racist areas in the state of Maryland, right? And I'm not naming any names because it's not necessary, but you hear what I'm saying. I've had to defend being in Black skin as a Black educator. And I'm more qualified, not by degree, because I don't have a doctorate, but I'm more qualified than a lot of the PhDs at these colleges and universities in my state or my city. This week, she said, you've been teaching way longer than me. You've been doing this longer. And just from you opening your mouth, you know your stuff, and we want you on our team. Okay, so where's the contract that says I'm full-time?
I get it. So I get exactly what you're saying, because someone said to me one day, they said, well, you're not calculating that properly. You don't know how to count that. And I thought, I've been doing this work for over 10 years. And I went back to my office, and at the time I did not have my, you know how you put your master's and your whatever behind your name. I did not have that on the wall. And I may get in trouble for saying it, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to put it out there because we canceling the enemy right where he is. I told the administrative staff, I need you to put my MCM and my MA behind my name for one thing. I'm not bringing my degrees. My degrees are right there on my wall. I got 2 masters. I have a bachelor's, 2 masters, and I said, and if I was to actually get all my certificates and bring them in, it would probably equal some of these PhDs. Right?
Listen,
but it was kind of offensive how people will automatically, like you say, it's that bias, and they qualify you not on what you really are skilled and know. They just automatically assume. And I had to take a step back and breathe. I was like, I'm not even going to respond but I have vowed that I'm going to be unapologetically who I am. I don't have to prove to you. I know who I am. I'm so confident, Professor Keisha, in who I am. I'm not trying to prove it to anyone else.
Absolutely. But how long did it take us to get there? Because we didn't start. We didn't start.
So we want to encourage those listening to us tonight to take the knowledge, read the books, learn, and then learn who you are and grow in who you are. If you're struggling, I promise you, if you're struggling, it won't always be that way. We want to encourage you tonight to really, really, first of all, ask God to show you who you are. because he's the one that gave me my confidence. And I know he's the one that came along and wrapped you up and gave you your confidence. If you need to ask God to show you who you are in him, where you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to be, and don't let anyone talk you out of that. Again,
there's the scripture that says I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, but in terms of practical application, it also, yes, this is who God says I am, but there's been so many whispers in the ears of Black women, right? In the ears of Black men, but in our context, in the ears of Black women, that you're the bitter, angry Black woman. You're too fat. Your hips are too big. Your nose is too wide. Your lips are too. You're not a good mother. You're stupid. You're too Black. You're too light. You're too this. You're too that. Your teeth are too crooked. Your gap in between your teeth is too big. It's so many things. So the whispers. So it takes us as women individually saying to dispel and eliminate those lies, to look in the mirror every day. I'm talking about practical application. You are beautiful, Keisha. You are beautiful, Vera. Whatever your name is, look in the mirror and say it until you freaking believe it. It took me years to look in the mirror and say, girl, you fine. Like, you're beautiful. And if I'm honest, there are still some days, and my best friend can tell you, because I just texted her the other day, what I wore the other night to the party, I didn't like what I had on. I look fat. Like, why would I say that? Like, but I looked at the pictures and I was like, oh, my stomach was sticking out. I forgot to suck it in. But these are the things here. So what? It's my stomach. You cute. Like,
yeah,
you eat good. You're living good, right?
Right.
But I've got to tell myself that, because do not think, and you already know this, but I'm saying it to those who are watching, don't think that those whispers, even though we have high self-esteem, but because of where we come from and because of the historical stuff that we live in this nation, and the things that we see in the media about Black women, and still the roles that Black women are taking. Halle Berry, before she could win an Oscar, she had to sleep with a white man and show her breasts in a movie.
Yep.
And she earned an Oscar for that.
Yep.
I want to say some words that I can't say right, but it makes me so angry.
Yep.
But these are the things that we live with in this skin every day. So I hear you when you say this year is about self-care and about being unapologetically a Black woman.
Yep.
I'm
point blank. That's it.
I'm doing the same thing. I started last year, and I'm doing it even more so this year. And I have to dispel those myths even in my own family. Because it's there of how we think we should dress and present ourselves to the world as Black people, as a Black woman, as a Black woman in her late 40s or in her 50s or late 50s.
About to be 60.
Right. So it's like, just let me be me. Like, just let me be whatever me that me and God can muster. And you work on you and leave me alone, please. Like, if I've chosen to put on something, I have thought it through 50 million times already, and I don't need you telling me, oh, you shouldn't have worn that. Your boobs are sticking out. You're a pastor. Listen, I got breasts, and they're beautiful, and I'm going to show them. Like, you don't see my nipples, right? You don't see that. I'm going to be tasteful. I'm going to be professional. But I've got to be a woman. I am so tired of women preachers looking like men.
Oh, gosh.
I can't. Or even collegiates, because I'm in education. I'm an educator, and I'm in multiple schools. I'm not going to look like a man in front of my students. I want my Black babies, when I go into the classroom, I'm like I'm dressing right now. They need to see that this is possible. This is attainable. When everything around them, when they go home, tells them, you ain't gonna never be nothing. You just like your daddy. You ain't gonna never be nothing. You just like your mama, and she on drugs and she's incarcerated.
Come on now.
So if I go in with a hoodie and I ain't got no makeup on, I look like I ain't bathed in 3 days, like some of my colleagues look, right? And my hair's all over my head. What message is that sending to my kids? Or even from the pulpit? Like, we've got to be free to be in the skin that we're in, and that cultural racism that we get from our own people. We didn't even touch on that, like we a teeny bit, because we talked about slavery, but it's so much. There's so many layers. And when you talk about, the way our cognition, the way we learn, the way we process information is so different, because we have to, that the information that's coming in is being funneled through all of the things that we have heard over the years, and we're trying to process it. And it's no wonder that you just don't snap, crackle, and pop, right? This is why we need therapy. I have therapy every Thursday at 2:00, and I am better for it. I am such a better me. And you can even look at me, my sister, my friend, my big sister, you can look at me and tell I am so much healthier than I was 2 years ago. Right?
Yes, ma'am. She's great.
I'm taking care of me. I'm not where I want to be, right? I'm not, but I'm so much better. I'm getting there. Yes. And I hear you saying the same thing. And I'm celebrating you. I am celebrating you. I'm getting on a plane and coming to celebrate you for your 60th. We're going to party. It's going to be a great time. Yes. But I'm going to celebrate another Black woman, because you are out here beating the pavement, doing the work in the prison system, in the church, in the workplace. We wear so many hats as Black women, and we've got to celebrate one another more. When we see each other on the streets, sis, you look good, instead of tearing each other down. That's where it starts. Like, if you really want to be effective, where do I start with all of this that was shared tonight? Start at the gas pump, in the grocery line, when you see the Black woman at the checkout counter. And this is not just for Black people. This is for anybody listening. Encourage the people that you see that are in Black and brown skin, because it takes a lot to walk in these shoes every day.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I know we have to end this segment, but again, it was such a blessing to chat, and again, not just chat, but for you to share all your knowledge with us. I can't wait to see you in a month or so.
Yes, I'm excited.
But it's going to be so much fun. But again, Professor Jones, thank you so much. Girl, I love you. And looking forward to other future conversations we're going to have. And again, have a blessed night. Good night, everybody. This is Vera Sadler with VLS Coaching and with Tuesday Talk Live. Until we talk again next week. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.